Nicki Sharp from Windmill HR Consulting with me today. Welcome, Nicki.
Oh, thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. I've invited Nicki on because if you haven't noticed, with a new government recently, and as part of the work that they've done, and part of the changes that they're considering, they've launched a 100-day pledge, haven't they, Nicki?
They have, yeah. So this was launched on the 17th of July, which is the date of the opening of Parliament, so also known as the King's Speech. And what they've basically done is they've made a 100-day pledge to introduce loads of changes to our employment law. So it's going to be a really busy time for HR consultants, people in the HR world, business owners, as we keep an eye on this as it evolves over the next 100 days.
So this is a team talk special, just to really get a flavour of what's in that pledge, what's changing or might change, because nothing is completely in stone yet, and start considering some of the actions that leaders, employers will have to take. So should we dive in straight into kind of what's being proposed?
Yeah, let's do
There's
that.
quite a few areas. I guess pay is often one that employees and employers consider the most. What's happening to reform around pay, Nicki?
Okay, so there's a few things coming up, or proposed things that are coming up onto pay. So the first thing that the Labour government are looking at is the raise of wages for workers, essentially. So we currently have the national living wage, and it's broken down into different categories for different age groups, and they're looking to remove the age bracket for the younger workers, so the age 18 to 20-year-olds, which will essentially streamline things, but also increase the wages for that group of people, as well as they're looking at taking into account the cost of living when they decide what rate of pay they will award. So we don't know yet what that's going to be, but that's one thing that they are looking at. They're also looking at statutory sick pay and strengthening statutory sick pay, so making it available to all workers without a waiting period. So currently there's a 3-day waiting period. So in other words, you have to be sick for at least 4 days for statutory sick pay to kick in. And you also need to earn a minimum of £123 a week on average. So they're looking at removing that waiting period and also making it applicable to lower earners, so people that do not reach that lower earnings bracket. So that's, again, it's looking at a benefit to most people. They're also looking
the 3-day working, the period that they would remove it, down to 1 day or 0 days?
So from day one, so from the very first day of sickness, that's what they're looking at. So they're also looking at closing pay gaps. So most people are probably aware that bigger companies need to report on the gender pay gap, which is where we get the women earning less than men figures from, and that comes out annually. It's for companies bigger than 250 staff. But they're looking at mandating the publication of ethnicity and disability pay gaps as well as gender pay gaps. So I suppose from the employer side, there's the administrative burden of kind of producing those figures, and depending on how much information you've got available can make it quite tricky to produce those figures. But on the plus side, it does mean that we've got visibility of what's going on in that area, just like we have with the gender pay gap. And that means that we're able to track it and improve it if that is necessary. So this is just for firms larger than 250 staff. But it is, it would be good practice for a smaller business maybe to just keep a track of how that's going for them.
I guess some of those things, good news for the employee if you fall into those categories. Potentially extra work or extra cost for the employer.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, isn't it? And I think the Labour government seem to be wanting to make things better for employees, which, if these things do go ahead, it would obviously improve perhaps people's standards of living, because they're going to be earning a bit more, they're going to be getting sick pay, so get a bit more security around that. But on the other side, if you're a small business, for example, you have to pay your 18 to 20-year-olds more money, or you need to pay people from day one of sickness. Obviously, that is an extra cost, and we just need to be mindful of that. and people who own these types of businesses will need to be mindful of that and plan for those additional costs if they do come into force.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that you can. Have they published the amount?
They haven't yet, no.
Yeah.
Generally, the amounts come closer to the time. Generally, the national living wage increases are in April, so I don't know whether, at the moment, whether they're looking to increase the amounts in October or whether they'll announce the amounts in October at the end of the 100 days ready for April. Generally, businesses do get a little bit of notice of what's coming. Obviously, they need to be able to plan for that. But that remains to be seen, really.
So, I mean, I guess the 18 to 20 wage is relatively easy for people to start planning for, even if their figures weren't perfect in terms of if they've got people in that
Yeah,
age
yeah.
bracket,
I
they
think it's
can
going to depend
roughly
very much
calculate
on.
how much more they might cost.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to depend very much on what type of business you've got. I mean, if some places, maybe hospitality, do rely on that sort of age bracket of workers, and it could just increase their costs significantly, along with obviously the on costs as well. So the annual
Yeah.
leave and the sick pay that they'll be paying if they're employed, then pension contributions and so on. It could increase the cost a lot more than just the increase in wages, if that makes sense.
We're fairly candid on Team Talk, and I like to dig behind things, not necessarily my opinion, but the sick pay. Some people are cynical on that. Might be saying, okay, well, does that mean people can get sick pay and just take a sickie, or will people perhaps need to strengthen up on their processes and procedures for that to work?
Yeah, I mean, a
Do you
lot of
think?
companies do already have a sickness absence management policy. A lot of companies will be paying more than statutory sick pay anyway. So, for example, a business that I'm working with, which is a small business, about 35 to 40 people, they have just introduced company sick pay for 5 days in any rolling 12 months. So, a lot of employers are already doing that, which would obviously be over and above this requirement. But it is important, I would say this anyway, really, for small to medium sized businesses or any business, that you should be managing your sickness absence. So, for one thing, monitoring it, so tracking it, keeping a tab
Yeah.
via an automated system or otherwise of what sickness absences you've got. So, keeping an eye on individuals, keeping an eye on what any patterns, so trends. So, for example, there are a lot of people going off with stress or mental health related. What's causing that? Or is it musculoskeletal if you've got maybe a warehouse environment? What's causing that? And so that you as a business owner will then know what's going on in your business and can take some preventative action rather than just reacting. So I would say that companies ought to have a look into doing that anyway, but particularly if they do introduce this from day one, because you don't want to have the feeling that people are just taking sick leave because they're going to get paid, albeit that it is only statutory sick pay. So for a lot of people, that won't come close to their normal earnings.
Yeah, it's not reflective of a great culture of a business if that's what's going on.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
think that's
nothing really replaces great communications there, does it?
no. I think that's the thing is if you've got a lot, if you have an issue with sickness absence, then you maybe need to start looking at why that is, rather than looking at the cost. So try to be preventative in that. Which, if you speak to any HR person, they'll be able to help you and guide you on that. Introducing a sickness absence policy is always a good starting point, and we can talk you through how that would work with your business.
Excellent, thank you. And I guess one of the ways of looking at these, not just pay, but some of the others we'll come on to, is that you've got the kind of waiting for law to happen, and then you have to comply. Or you can choose, if it's relevant to you, aligned to your values, or just a bit more progressive as a business, to adopt either what suits you or what you think best practice is, can't you?
You can, yeah. So as long as your policies and handbook are at least reflecting what is required in law, then you have all scope to be more generous. So, for example, we're going to come on to talk about bereavement leave, which the government are looking at introducing as a mandatory thing. So you need to provide, I think they said, paid bereavement leave for people. Currently, a lot of businesses will provide some kind of compassionate or bereavement leave, whether it's paid or unpaid, and that's great. But what people will need to do is just make sure that whatever comes in law is that their policies are at least providing people with that. You can be more generous, but you can't be less generous, I suppose, is the point.
Absolutely. And I guess where we've got kind of relatively low unemployment and
Yeah.
people can choose where they work, then obviously what motivates different people is going to depend on
Yeah.
them. But some of these things can be game changers in terms of standing you out in combination,
Exactly.
probably as an employer of choice.
Yeah. I think it very much sets the culture of the type of business that you are as well. For example, if you're looking after people when they go through a bereavement, because many people are going to go through some kind of bereavement when they're working for you, and if you look after people in that instance and allow them adequate time off and pay them, so that they don't lose out when they are already going through a really difficult time, it just sets the kind of culture of the business that you want to be. If you don't provide that, it kind of almost does the opposite, and it doesn't put you on a level playing field with businesses that are providing things like that. And you do tend to find that businesses go sort of all in, and they want to be seen to be like a really caring business who will pay you sick pay, pay you bereavement, look after you when you're going through the menopause, and all of those kind of things. Or they very much don't,
Yeah.
and then it's for people to choose, which of those type of environments they want to work in. So when it's difficult to recruit, at times when it is difficult to recruit, such as when there's periods of really low unemployment, to be able to recruit, you almost need to stand out or at least keep on a level playing field with other employers who are providing these things. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle.
Yeah, or indeed actually retain your staff by adapting and being forward thinking and
Yeah,
having things that are relevant, relevant,
exactly.
relevant,
Yeah, yeah,
relevant to them. So I don't know
yeah.
if you had a workforce and there was a lot of women over 40 in it, for example, then menopause, which I think is on in the guide as well, is
It is.
might be on your list.
Yeah, well,
So
exactly.
what might be happening from a menopause side?
So, employers already have a duty of care over their employees, so that already exists. But this looks like it's strengthening that, and specifically in terms of the menopause. So the proposals as they stand at the moment are for businesses, again, who are bigger than 250 employees, will need to introduce an action plan to show that they have looked after people when they know that they're going through the menopause. So it's making sure that you've got some kind of risk assessment or some kind of a written document that says that I have, as a business or as a manager of that business, sat down with this employee because I know that she's going through the menopause, and I've spoken to her about what's going on for her and how can I help in terms of reasonable adjustments to your working environment, to help you to struggle less with what you're going through. So one thing that's been highlighted is maybe looking at uniforms, so where people wear a uniform as part of their work, because women can become very hot when it's menopause
Yeah.
time. Looking at the fabric that the uniforms are made from, is it a really hot fabric? Is there something that can be done with the uniform to make that more wearable for somebody? Sometimes women are unable to sleep when they're going through the menopause, so are we able to adjust your working hours so that you don't come in struggling, completely exhausted first thing in the morning? Are we able to just push the start time back a little bit? How can we help? It's just all of those types of things, just looking at it in the round. What can we do to help you whilst you're going through that period, and just having that open communication. Also, I would say in terms of that, it's good to have some training for your managers. So all managers, not just women who are likely to go through the menopause, but men, everybody, so that they are aware of the
Absolutely.
types of conversation that they should be having, because people often say, "Oh, am I allowed to say that?" Well, yes, like you're allowed to say anything, but it's always nice to be informed as to what the conversation should look like, and also what the range of things that you could be dealing with in terms of what that lady is going through in the workplace. So just providing some training and opening that conversation so that people are no longer embarrassed or feel like, oh, I shouldn't be talking about, just to make it normal to have those conversations in the workplace, I think is a really good thing as well. So that could be part of your action plan, could be, I'm going to train my managers in how to handle menopause in the workplace.
Sounds very positive. Yeah. For that. And how about other enhancements to people's existing rights? Are there any other suspected changes?
Yes, there are many. Right, so the things that they're looking at are as follows. Take a deep breath. So you've got removing the qualifying period for basic rights. So, for example, for unfair dismissal. So if you're an employee of a business and you are dismissed, you currently need to wait. You currently need to have 2 years service, so you have to work for that employer for 2 years before you can claim unfair dismissal. So some businesses would almost use that as almost like a probationary period, because they know that if they dismiss you before the end of 2 years, you do not have the right to take them to tribunal for unfair dismissal. I mean, you do still have the right to claim discrimination, so it's not recommended, but that's a whole nother story. So what the Labour government are talking about is making that a day one right. So from the first day that you walk through the door of your employer, you have the right, if they dismiss you, to claim unfair dismissal. So that makes it a much safer working environment for an employee. What does it do to the employer, though, is the question, because in my mind, if you're a small to medium-sized business, it's going to make you think really hard about who you're going to employ. Are they the right person? Do you need to employ somebody? Because the risk is that if you then end up with the wrong person and you try to dismiss them, even if it's for very, very valid reasons, then there's a risk that they could claim unfair dismissal against you. So there is mention of some kind of probation period still. So what that looks like, we don't yet know. And it's really important that we keep an eye on how this evolves, especially as the Labour government will be consulting with people like the IOD, the CIPD, so anybody who's got some kind of stakeholder status in this. They will be talking to them about how that would affect them as a business. So it's really important that we kind of keep up to date with that.
I imagine that's going to be, I can imagine that's going to be quite, needed to be quite tight in terms of how it's defined. What is unfair dismissal and what is not meeting your probationary requirements of the.
So I think the rules around unfair dismissal are pretty tight as they are, and I don't think they've said that they're going to change that necessarily, but it's the probation period part. Like, what do you mean by a probation period? Because we currently have, most businesses will have a probation period, normally 3 to 6 months. Like, are the Labour government saying that if you dismiss somebody during their probation because they're not up to the job or for whatever reason, that they're still going to have the right to claim unfair dismissal, because the probation period currently is a chance for the business to see, is this person the right person? Equally, for the person to see, is this the right business for me? So it remains to be seen really how that's going to work. So I'm quite interested to see how that one evolves, because that could be tricky. And I don't think the Labour government want to make it ridiculously difficult for businesses, because that wouldn't be in their interest to stop businesses from wanting to hire people. But at the same time, they've said that they want to protect employees and give them the right to claim unfair dismissal. So there's going to be a tricky balancing act. They've also said that currently, following termination of employment, you currently have 3 months to raise an employment tribunal claim, and they've said that they're looking to extend that to 6 months. So that's another change that they're looking at introducing. The problem that I can foresee with all of this is that the tribunal system is already extremely overwhelmed with cases. So previously, a few years ago, they tried introducing a fee so that you had to pay to try to take your employer to tribunal. That was removed again, as seen as discriminatory. So consequently, the tribunal system is hugely busy. I think there's a waiting time of about a year to even get court. So you can see then that if you've got more people with the right to claim unfair dismissal, the more tribunal claims you're likely to have, the more overwhelmed the system is going to become. So what's this space? I don't know how that's going to work.
I'm guessing some businesses are very good at onboarding people on and making it clear what they need to achieve. Others, I won't name or shame anyone, are a bit more vague. So I expect there are a lot of businesses out there that, however the law lands, could benefit from being more clear about expectations of employees, particularly at a probationary period. They're going to be potentially at more risk.
Exactly.
Discussion, debate, even if it doesn't go to tribunal, aren't they?
Exactly. And will they just have a much more rigorous interview or selection process? Will they start to have many parts to their selection process so that they test people to within an inch of their life before they walk through the door. Like, I don't know what that's going to look like, because currently that's really, I mean, you would obviously be very careful about who you select, and you would interview, and maybe depending on the role you would have some kind of assessment centre or whatever. And then you've got your probation period where you know that you're in the job now. I can now manage you, make sure you can achieve your objectives, and that you are able to learn what I need to learn to be able to do the job that you're paid to do, and equally that you're happy working for us as an employer. But if you take that away, that's tricky in my mind. It'd be interesting to see.
I guess there's a balance, isn't there? Because I think
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but under current rules, then you can pretty much get rid of somebody that's been there for 23 months without much to do, can't you?
I mean, it wouldn't be recommended to do so. In theory, yes, you could. You still need to walk.
It's not. I'm not condoning it or recommending it, but it's not that difficult if somebody wanted to, is it?
Yeah, well, I suppose they have no right to claim unfair dismissal, I suppose, is the thing. They would still have the right to claim discrimination, but yeah, this will definitely make it a lot more difficult from that point of view.
Yeah.
So the other bits and pieces that are coming up under the enhancement of existing rights are enhancing protection for pregnant workers, so making it unlawful to dismiss a woman who's had a baby for 6 months after she comes back to work. So still have the right to maternity leave, obviously, but for 6 months after she comes back from her maternity leave, whatever length of time that is, then you would not be able to dismiss that person. So again, this needs some flesh on the bones, because what does it mean? I mean, surely you can't just allow somebody to, I don't know, be fraudulently acting within your business, punching
the
people.
positive sentiment of that is fantastic. But
Yeah.
you could come back and say, look, I've got a baby. The computer says no, can't be bothered.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And that's there has to be some level of sensible restrictions around that, I would have said. I get the sentiment. In fact, I personally was made redundant 10 weeks after I went back from maternity leave, having had my first child, which was not good. So I kind of understand that it's for protection of the employee, but it has to be within reason, doesn't it? It has to be that the employee has to behave in a reasonable fashion so as not to be dismissed. The other couple of bits and pieces that are coming up under that are the fire and rehire, so strengthening information and consultation procedures and preventing dismissals for not agreeing to worse contracts. So this is, everybody would have heard of what happened with the P&O ferries. It was quite widely reported, wasn't it, on the news as being just awful practice. And I think that this is almost in response to that and other kind of practices, just to stop basically companies having the ability to do that and to treat their employees like that. Because, understandably that was not a good situation and was not handled well on the face of it from what we saw. And then the other, which I suppose is not surprising for a Labour government, is updating trade union laws and strengthening trade union rights and simplifying the union recognition process. So again, it will be interesting to see what exactly that looks like, because we don't currently know. They just want to, I think, in essence, they want to make it easier for an employer to recognise a union as being their union recognised within that business. At the moment, I think it's a slightly onerous procedure, and I think consequently trade union membership has decreased over the years, and maybe it's trying to look at reversing that. But again, we don't really know the details of what that's going to look like.
No, it's not unexpected to see that. Yeah, I'm sure it will have some interesting connotation, perhaps in private schools. I'm not expecting you to answer that.
I don't know.
Yeah, all kinds,
no comment.
All kinds of things could kick off.
Yeah.
Kick off there. What about time off? It was quite an interesting. I looked at some of the IOD report which you highlighted to me, Nicky.
Yeah.
And one of the stats I saw on there was 58% of business leaders disagreed with the right to disconnect for employees. That astounded me. This right to switch off is also in the pledge, isn't it?
Yeah. So the right to switch off, which is already in existence in some European countries. So what it basically means is that we're kind of heading towards a 24/7 you can email your employee at any time of the day or night, weekends, holidays, whatever. And in some places, they will expect you to reply, or the culture of the business is that you know that you need to reply if you value your career in that place. And it's just trying to basically stop that, because in line with that kind of 24/7 culture, people are becoming more mentally unwell, there's more stress, people are becoming ill, and it's trying to really stop that, and stopping business owners, leaders, managers from expecting their employees to be available to them all of those hours. So I think it looks like it would reflect, in a way, what some of the European countries have done on this, and just make it so that people cannot be punished or treated at detriment because they do not respond to emails at 1 o'clock in the
Yeah, I
morning.
think France is one of those countries, isn't it?
France is one, yeah.
I've certainly read some examples about some of the things they're doing, and even they're using tech, aren't they? So if you send an email, it
Yeah.
just holds it in the system, delivers it the next morning.
Yeah.
So actually, if you choose to work an evening, then it doesn't disturb someone else's
Yes.
evening, stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so a lot of employers, I've noticed actually recently that more and more employers have got as a standard email signature. My working hours may be different to yours. Just because I'm emailing you now doesn't mean that you need to respond now if it's not your normal working hours, or words to that effect. So in other words, if I am choosing to work in the evening because, I don't know, my child's been sick today and I'm catching up on my hours, I don't expect you to respond to me if it's not your working hours because you've been at work all day. So putting something like that in an email signature kind of indicates the culture of the business that you're working for. And if your leaders have got that in their email signature, then that's even better, because that means that they're not expecting you to respond. What's even better than that is if they don't email you outside of working hours, so that you
Absolutely,
don't.
that's exactly, you read my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking, because I sometimes, I sometimes do that, and I was like, well, no, I'm role modelling stuff here, so
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
will get the email at 10, and okay, I don't expect an answer at 10 in the evening, but I am demonstrating to them that I'm working then. Is that the best thing to be
Exactly. Yeah.
role modelling, or what I would
Yeah.
try and remember to do if that was me, and it is occasionally, I'll be open, um, is to delay that email to be sent in the morning.
Yes. Exactly.
And it's purely my decision. It's not something that they need to follow or think, well, in order to get somewhere, I need to follow this lead.
Yes, exactly. So, modelling the behaviour is really the best way to do it, and that could be said for any behaviour, can't it? But this is literally making it unlawful, perhaps, if this is what happens to be introduced, making it unlawful for people to email outside of working hours. So we'll have to wait and see what that looks like, but I think as it exists in other countries, it wouldn't be too difficult to kind of replicate what's going on there. Although it is interesting that the
Interesting.
IOD have said that was it 58% of their leaders think that that's a really bad idea. So I don't know.
Disagreed.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. I suppose the other things that are coming up then under time off, so flexible working has been a huge topic, hasn't it, since really COVID times, and
Absolutely. Yes.
since
Yeah.
everybody realised that, oh look, we can actually do the same job, if not better, remotely, flexibly, hybrid working. All of those conversations have been being had since essentially the start of COVID. So we currently have flexible working changed in April of this year. And it changed from to be able to request flexible working, you needed to have 26 weeks service with your employer. And it changed in April, just gone, to giving people the right to make that request from day one of their employment. So that already changed.
Okay.
But it was the right to request flexible working rather than the right to be granted flexible working. And the employer does currently, as it stands, does have the right to say no, subject to certain restrictions, which I won't. It's quite lengthy, so I won't go into the details of that. But this is basically saying that it's almost switching it around. So there's an automatic right to flexible working from day one. So we're essentially losing the request element. So it's not for you to request it. It's for you to say, well, I'm entitled to this from day one if this is what happens to be implemented, and for the employer to then have to say why that couldn't work. So in some businesses, it
And when we
just
say
won't be
flexible
possible.
working,
Yeah,
uh, are the different variants of that? Because I guess depending on the kind of industry you're in, I guess
yeah,
that could mean working from home. I guess if you're in, I don't know, hospitality, for example, does flexible working mean
yeah.
the right to choose your shifts? How does it?
Yeah, so I think I mean, obviously in some places, hospitality being one of them, warehouse work, retail, like you can't work from home in most of those, kind of public facing roles. That wouldn't be possible. But I think in that
Yeah,
circumstance, it would be the right to flexible hours. So for example, maybe the right to work school hours, term time, start later, finish later, like all of those different requests that could be looked at, that could be accommodated, perhaps within those places. It would just depend on the type of environment that it is and how feasible it is. Because obviously, you've got to think that we still need to protect people's businesses so that people can still run a business. And if the coffee shop is open from 8 till 4, somebody's got to be there from 8 to
yeah.
4. It's no
Coffee
good
shop
you
needs to be
saying,
open when people want to buy coffee.
yeah, it's no good you saying, oh, I can only work from 12 till 8. Well, I'm not open at 8 in the evening, so that's not going to work. And you would have thought that the right to say no to that would be protected because that's kind of ridiculous. But I suppose in many other environments, so more like an office type of a job, flexible working could include where you're working. So are you able to work from home?
Yeah,
Do you need to be in the office a certain amount of time? If so, why? What's the reason for that? And we're not sure yet how this is going to look. So, for example, I previously worked in a place where they wanted everybody in the team in on a Wednesday for collaboration, just to have a team meeting to make sure that you see everybody. And that to me at the time seemed reasonable. But will that be still considered reasonable under this guidance, or will it be, well, actually you don't need to be there, you can do your job permanently from home? We don't know yet what that's going to look like. So it will again be interesting to see how this comes out, because I think this is quite a big topic that is on everybody's radar.
it's a huge, and I think it has quite far-reaching impact because obviously anyone has a choice about where they work. It might be that people end up certain people default to choosing careers that allow them flexibility that others
Others
don't.
don't. Yeah.
I
And
think
then will it
even if,
become,
if you're in the, I don't know, if you're the spectrum of somewhere that does require people for a certain amount of hours, I don't know, maybe you run a factory,
yeah,
you run the factory efficiently currently, it has to run from 10 till 10 at night
yeah,
with that,
or
with the right amount of people there to
yeah. Yeah, but even
service
in,
it.
in even in that sort of case, could it be possible to job share, for example, if somebody wanted to work the early shift and somebody wanted to work, so split the shift in half and do the early and the late? Our business is looking creatively at these working arrangements. So yes, the factory, for example, needs to run from those hours throughout those hours, but could two people do that job, for example? Is there quieter time
I
during
think
the
that's
summer?
exactly the kind of creativity some of those businesses will need in
Yeah,
order to make sure that they are competitive within the
yeah.
within the landscape.
Absolutely, because otherwise they're going to really struggle to recruit potentially, and then they'll need to look at other ways of attracting employees. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a big topic, and there's, for example, schools. I mean, the school is open when the school is open, and it needs cover, and nursery childcare. There's certain ratios to meet for the nursery, so you have to have a certain number of staff there during those hours, otherwise you can't open. So it's quite complicated, but I would say that it just needs some creativity around it, because especially if some businesses are offering much more flexibility than we currently are because of this change, and others are not, then it is going to kind of widen the gap between employers of choice, I suppose, and everybody else. And
absolutely.
people may struggle to recruit more so because of their lack of ability to be flexible. And are they thinking of all of the options, even if it's not the most convenient? Could it possibly work? Just to give them a bit more of a chance to recruit the best staff.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some creative thinking required in
Yes.
many businesses
Yeah,
on
I
th-
think. I
on
mean,
this
there's a lot of
on
advice
this
out
front.
there. There's a lot of research and work has been done. And for example, you've got the 4-day working week movement, who's just about to introduce round 2 of four-day working week. And I think the majority of the businesses that went through that experiment, if you like, the first time have kept their 4-day working week because they found that they've been equally as productive, if not more so. But again, you can't have a 4-day working week in all environments because it just isn't possible.
Yeah. Is there any we're never going to cover the whole 100 pledge, 100-day pledge. Probably has got about 100 points. But is there anything significant that we haven't touched upon that you wanted to touch upon, Nicky?
Let me just quickly flick through my list. So we spoke about bereavement leave, didn't we? We touched on that. Did we?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah, we did bereavement leave. So a lot of companies already have something, but we just need to be mindful of what the minimum requirement is and make sure that you're providing at least that. Carers leave was introduced again in April. Currently, it's unpaid, and they're looking to review that and potentially make it a paid benefit because we're a society that are increasingly having care responsibilities. Okay, they've just granted the right to a week's unpaid carers leave, but how many people can afford to take a week of unpaid leave is a question. How much will that be taken up? So if they introduce that as a paid benefit, that could possibly be a benefit to employees. How will that affect the employer? We don't know because that will be an extra cost. Oh, and the one other fairly significant thing, which I will just touch on, is the status of employment. So currently, you've got 3 different types of workers. You've got those that are employed, who get the full range of benefits and rights. You've got those that are classified as workers, who get a certain amount of rights and benefits, but not as much as somebody that's employed. So in that group, you would have, for example, agency workers who are entitled to breaks and to be health and safety certificate safe at work, holidays and so on. But they don't get the right to claim unfair dismissal. They don't get the right for redundancy pay if the job ceases. They don't get the right for TP transfers and so on, like an employed person would. And you've also got your self-employed people, so people like you and I who run our own business. What the Labour government are looking at is reducing that down to only 2 different types of workers. So in other words, putting together those that are employed and those that are classified as workers as one group, and giving essentially the workers the same rights as the employees. So what that then does is potentially could decrease the flexibility that employers currently enjoy in being able to employ an agency worker. So say, for example, I'm really busy during the summer, I'm going to get some agency workers to cover that period. Are they still going to be able to do that, or are they going to need to pay that person, for example, pension and all the other benefits that are currently enjoyed only by an employee? Great for the employee. Will need to be looked at carefully by the employer.
Have quite a few debates around that one.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think we could talk all day about this, to be honest with you. But I think we've covered the main ones.
So just to recap, I know you mentioned it earlier on, but what's going to say? There's 100 days kind of consultant. They'll consult people like the IOD and FSB and people like that. I imagine. And what should happen in 100 days or 95 days or however many we've got left?
Yeah, so the 25th of October is the date that everybody's keeping an eye on, because that's 100 days from when the King's speech happened, so the opening of Parliament, which was on the 17th of July. So during that time, as you say, they will be looking in more detail at each of these pieces of proposed legislation, consulting with relevant stakeholders, such as the IOD, such as the CIPD, anybody that's got an interest in it, and working up what that piece of legislation is going to look like, and hopefully communicating it at some point before the 25th of October. It doesn't all land on our desk on that date with no warning. So I think, there's already been a lot of speculation about what's going to come, and it will just keep evolving over that 100 days. So I think for employers, it's important that you engage with an HR consultant, HR, if you've got your own internal HR people that they're making sure they keep on top of and what's coming up. There's a lot of webinars out there at the moment. There's a lot of information that you can read. So just make sure that you or your HR representative are keeping on top of everything so that you are prepared. What's going to need to be done then is you're going to need to look at probably your contract, and your policies and your practice in line with all of it, and just review and make sure that it does still comply with the law once the laws have changed on the 25th of October. So I suppose at the moment, these are proposals. These are things that could happen. They're not all definitely going to happen, and they're not all definitely going to happen in the format that they're currently being proposed. So things can change and evolve over the next 100 days. But it is, in terms of a timescale, it's quite tight for a lot of change to happen. So it will be interesting to see
I
what actually
imagine, I
hits.
don't know this, I imagine that depending on what it is and how complicated it is to change and the input from the consultants, when it becomes law, might vary depending on the item and the complexity of bringing it to market, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it depends on the feedback when they consult. If people are like, yep, that's a great idea, then that's easy. If people are saying, actually, no, that's not going to work, and these are the reasons why, then it's going to need to be reviewed and tweaked, or whole scale changed, depending on what that feedback is. Because I don't think their intention is to upset anybody. I think it's to try to improve things. And if actually people are saying that's not going to work for us, as an industry, then it will need to potentially be looked at, you would hope.
Yeah. And what would you say? Look, that's the kind of, some people might take the view of wait and see and adapt.
Yeah.
Others might be more proactive and want to be part of establishing best practice and leading the way. What advice would you give those more proactive kind of
Yeah, so I
companies?
would say to keep an eye out for the consultations that are coming out. So there's loads of information online. If you just literally Google it, then things will come up depending on which particular area you're interested in contributing to. But there are ways that you can contribute. Normally it's through the bigger kind of institute. So for me, the Chartered Institute of Personal Development, the CIPD, is my kind of registered body. And through them, I'll be able to have some input. Similarly, the IOD, I'm sure the FSB, all of those kind of places will have some say in the consultations. And just make sure that you have your say. I would advise just to have your voice heard, even if it's not listened to. It's always good to, the more people that speak up and express their opinion, the better.
Thank you so much, Nicky, for joining us and giving us a quick rundown, summary, perspective on this 100-day pledge. Perhaps we'll see you again in 100 days and decipher what's happened.
That would be good. See you on the 25th of October.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me there.
No, an absolute pleasure, and we'll include details of how you can reach out to Nicky if you've got any questions as follow up from this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.